Hi, I'm Anthony and this is Bob Barker, and I finally tackled my miter station. So today we're going to show you how we made this cabinet to get the build started. Let's get to it. Alright, so this is the area that I'm going to use for my miter station. A lot of it is just this old workbench which I made like 15 years ago. At the time I didn't even really have a use for it, I just kind of wanted to make something, so I made a workbench. And it has served me well through the years, but its time has come. I need something that's going to work a little bit better for my purposes. So my plan is I'm getting kind of rid of a lot of this clutter here, and I'm going to have my cabinets go all the way out here, and then the miter cell kind of be stationed right around here, and then I'm going to have the cabinets come out to this way. One of the issues that I am going to have is this railing, it sticks out about 2 inches farther than the rest of it. So I'm going to have to account for that when I make the cabinet for this area. But in the end, it's going to give me a nice, good, long surface that I'm going to be able to make all the cuts that I need to do. So, time to get started.
So I'm going to get started by breaking down these sheets of plywood, and for some reason I had the bright idea of putting it on my workbench. And this is 3/4 inch Baltic birch, and it is so heavy. I don't know what I was thinking, but I finally got it up there and able to get it all broken down. Now, a better thing to do really is just put my supports on the ground and just cut it there and don't deal with the hassle. So here I'm just measuring everything out, making sure I got a good lines, and I'm using my new track saw guides that I made recently, and noticing that I forgot to account for the width of my kerf, and it has to be the other way so I don't cut into the piece. So always pay attention to what side you're cutting on and where your kerf is going to take away material from. And I must say, I am really loving these guides. It makes doing this so much easier than the way I used to do it with just my big leveler clamped down to the edges. It's so much easier to get precise cuts. So that's the pieces for the bottom and the sides of the cabinet. I'll just go ahead and get these out of the way, and then we can get ready to get started on my table saw. So for here, I did put on my dado stack, but of course you don't need a dado stack to do this. I always mention that you can just do multiple passes with just a regular blade. But the whole point of this part here is I just wanted to put a rabbet joint on the edge so it gets a nice surface for it to sit on, the sides to sit onto the base of my cabinet. And I use the sacrificial fence here because I'm going all the way up to the fence with this cut, and I use this little test piece to make sure it fit right and it was perfect. And if you don't want to do rabbets, you could always either just butt it up or pocket hole screw it to the base of your cabinet. So after I get these cut out, it's time to move on to the dado that the middle divider of the cabinet's going to sit on. And as I'm doing it, you can see all that dust flying in my face. I always forget to turn on my vacuum for dust collection. So once I get it on, then I can actually finish doing that dado. And it ended up coming out pretty good, but I do want to mention before I ran this one, I did do a test piece just to make sure it was going to fit into the pieces of the plywood that I had here. So now it's time to get started on breaking down the little support pieces that I'm going to be putting. So I just grab one of the offcuts there, and I just break down a large piece a couple times, just give me enough that I can chop down later and use as my cross supports, as well as some pieces for my toe kicks. And it's really nice with this large workbench. I can use it as an outfeed table, so when I'm cutting down pieces like this, it's really useful. If you like that workbench, I do have a video on that, so go ahead and check that out. I'll put a link in it for you. And now here I go again for getting my dust collection vacuum. If I turn that on, then I can actually get back to work and not have dust completely in my face.
All right, so I just wanted to mention for a minute why I'm doing my toe kicks like this, because these are the pieces for my toe kicks. And my floor is extremely unlevel, not just in one dimension, but it's unlevel this way and this way. So it's got like multiple different humps and stuff like that I'm gonna have to work with. And I'd rather do a separate toe kick, and I'll put some levelers on these, and that way I can get everything nice and level and right where I want it without having to deal with the whole cabinet trying to shim it up with the bigger, bulkier item. So I just figured for my purposes it's going to be a lot easier this way.
Next, we can get started on the glue up of the cabinet box. Now I just got these 9-degree positioning squares. As you can tell, I kind of like to buy tools just because. But of course, you don't need them to do this. You can just use regular clamps and just kind of pin them in place. But I figured, hey, more tools doesn't hurt. And they actually did work out pretty darn well. They helped me get those nice and square. Although it took me a little finagling the first time that I used them, just to kind of get used to the motion of doing this, and not having them fall all over the place. I also do want to mention that these are great for getting you that 90-degree angle in between your pieces. And the rabbet really helped them sit well, and so it helped in conjunction with it. But for some extra clamping force, it's still better to put some other regular clamps on the edges of it while your glue is drying to keep a good joint there. So while we're waiting for that, I go ahead and just get my pocket hole jig and get started on putting those pocket holes in all of my support pieces. And once we finally got all these done, we can go ahead and put the cabinet bottom on the ground, and Bob Barker always wants to test everything out, make sure the construction is adequate for his approval. My little helper, he's always there to make sure that I'm getting the job done right. So now we're putting in the center divider in the cabinet, and so I'm just kind of gluing up that dado slot. Then we're going to slide that other piece right in there and kind of tap it down into place using the extra block just to kind of protect the top of the wood there. And then here I'm checking to make sure my supports fit in properly, because I did of course cut it short on the back end to make sure there's enough room for it. Then I also mark the center of that support and on my divider to make sure I get them in the right place before I get everything locked into place with the pocket hole screws. And those pocket hole screws are also on that center divider there. And I always use clamps whenever I'm doing pocket holes, because if you've ever done them, you know, like whenever you do it, it always wants to shift a little bit, so the clamps will keep it nice and in place right exactly where you want it. And you never know where the supervisor is going to be. Sometimes he's watching right behind you where you don't even notice it. So always got to stay on your toes. So after I get that done, I'm just checking the measurements of everything to make sure it's the same measurements from front to back. Make sure my spacing is good, and then also from corner to corner to make sure that it's still nice and square. So after that's done, I go ahead and get started on my toe kick. So I break out the pocket hole jig again and get all these pieces ready. We just go ahead and glue and hook those all together with some pocket hole screws. And I got that middle piece in there just for some little extra support, and also it's going to be an extra way just for me to connect my main cabinet to the toe kick. And of course, again, check for square from corner to corner. And I ended up moving that middle piece just to be off-center to make it a little easier to attach to the main cabinet when I'm ready to.
All right, so I did want to mention that I intentionally didn't cut out the drawers for this base cabinet when I was cutting out the rest of the pieces. And the reason being is I wasn't sure if the actual measurements were going to be the exact same as it was on my 3D modeling. Turns out, surprised the heck out of me, it actually was exactly on where I wanted it to be, so I can go ahead and start cutting out my pieces. Now, one other thing to keep in mind is you do got to keep clearance for the drawer slides. So the average drawer slides are usually about a half an inch thick each, so minus off an inch from your space. And then they have a little bit of play in them, so it doesn't have to be too precise, because you don't want to squeeze it where it kind of inhibits the function. So just a little bit short of that, and it'll slide really nice. So now that we've confirmed the size for it, we can get started on making our drawers.
So we're cutting the large pieces of plywood down with the circular saw just to get a little bit more manageable pieces before I cut some more with a table saw. But honestly, even if you don't have a table saw, you can do all of these cuts with the circular saw just using those guides. And I do have a quick little video on those guides if you want to check those out too. But since I do have a table saw, it makes it so much faster just to make the cuts here. Because as you can see, that pile is stacking up and it gets much larger once I get it all cut out. So it was getting late, so the next day got back to work with Bob Barker. Keep an eye out for any stray cats that may interfere with our territory and work. As you can see by his appearance, he is a quite vicious guard dog. So we continue to break down these pieces for the drawers. There was still a lot more pieces to go. Supervisor kind of snuck in underneath the workbench. I didn't even know that he was there until I watched this video. So now I'm using this test piece here to test out the little groove that I'm going to slide the bottom of the drawers in with the plywood that I'm going to use to make sure it's a good tight fit. So once I got that dialed in, then I can go ahead and get started on my pieces. I did want to mention on this one, I am not using my dado stack. I'm just using my regular saw blade. And what I'm going to do is I just run one cut on every piece, and then I move it over just slightly, and then end up running a second cut on all the pieces. And that's going to get it just where we need it to go in these bottom pieces. So now that we've got that done, we can go ahead and get those pieces cut out. And I just pretty much broke all of this down with my circular saw. And now that we have all the pieces, it's on to sanding. Now I did the drawer bottom pieces by hand just because it's a really thin veneer on this plywood, so I didn't want to go through. I just wanted to take down it just a little bit so it'd be nice and smooth. I made sure I had a face mask on just for protection from all this dust as I broke out my regular sander and got to work on that huge pile. It was at this point that I started to question why I wanted so many drawers on this cabinet. Do I really need all these drawers and have to sand every one of these pieces over and over? And I slowly slipped into insanity, and I think I may actually still be sanding, and I've created a pleasant fiction in my mind that I have just moved on from it. And with all those pieces done, I rested and had dreams of just buzzing sanders flying around my head. So next is putting the drawers together. So I just did a quick little mock-up here to make sure everything fit nice, and I got my huge stack, and we can start hooking everything together. So I used glue on all the joints, just kind of smeared a bunch of that on, then put them together, and then I'm just going to use my brad nailers to get them in place. Now there's tons of ways to make drawers and different ways you can do this. You don't need the brad nailer. You can use pocket holes on the back, and to be honest, why did I choose the brad nailer over pocket holes? There's absolutely no reason. I just kind of decided, hey, I want to do this time. So with that back piece on, then we can slide in the bottom piece and then glue up the front here so we can get that attached as well. So once we get it where we like, we go ahead and use the brad nailer again, get it in place, and then we have a finished drawer. Now, of course, I did double check all these to make sure it still stayed square, and luckily they did. So then we just keep on making more and more and more. Gonna have a lot of drawer space. It's gonna be awesome for my tool storage.
All right, so now that I got all the drawers made up, it's time to get the sliders on. So just to make it nice and simple, I went ahead and just marked the center line on each one of them, and then we'll just take out the piece from there and we can just line it up and screw them in and we'll be good to go. So off to the assembly line.
I use this little block piece just to make sure it's lined up perfectly with the front of my drawer. And then so we have it in place, I just kind of pre-drilled each spot where I'm going to put in the screws, and then you screw them in place, and that's it. When I flip them around, I use these 2x4s just to kind of help support it. That way it didn't rock on the other slider and it stayed nice in place for me.
All right, so now that I have all the slides on the drawers, it's time to get these mounted onto the cabinet itself. Now there's multiple ways to do this. I just happened to recently get these jigs from Craig, so I thought I'd give them a try. You can just make some spacers like these right here. You can put them in there, and that'll give you like an easy and even spacing for your slides. However, with my design, with the drawers being different sizes, I'd have to make 3 different sets of these, so it's just a little bit much. You could also really just measure it, mark your lines, and clamp this into the center line, and then drill it that way. So there's plenty of ways to do it without having these jigs here, but I'm gonna give these a shot and see how it goes.
Now here I am measuring just because I wanted just to set back my slides just a little bit from the front. It kind of helps your drawer faces sit nice and flush on that front surface. And then once we got them there, we just screw them in place, and really that's it. And these are soft close drawer slides, but there's a lot of other options you go with that would be a little bit less expensive. So after putting the ones on the left, I'm just marking out the locations for the ones that I need on the right. And then we'll go ahead and use the jig to get those in place as well. Then for the bottom ones, it didn't fit, so I used just 2x4 blocks just to get my spacing for all 4 of those, and everything turned out nice and smooth. So once we got them all in, it's time to get the drawers going. So you just kind of get them in there, give them one little push on the end just to kind of lock the mechanism, and then everything slides nice and smooth. Now the next step is, since you will see the top part of the back of this, I just wanted to put this extra piece of plywood on there just to dress it up a little bit. I didn't go all the way down to where the toque is going to be, because you're never going to see that edge of it. So we just kind of lined it all up and tacked it in place here. And Bob Barker is making sure that I take little breaks here. Can't be all work and no play. And like a good shop assistant, he comes over here to point out that I missed a spot over there. So making sure I get everything done right. With this fully secured in place, it's time to flush it up. When I did cut out the piece, I cut it just a little bit long on all edges because I knew I was going to come with my flush trim bit and get it all nice and flushed up. And then a couple things I forgot. I did want to screw in my top brace piece into the back one just for a little extra structural rigidity. And then I forgot to put in these pocket holes that I'm going to use partially on the sides there to connect the top two. And now Bob Barker, with his brand new haircut, is making sure the top is a suitable material. Now this is MDF, so I made sure to have some protection when I was cutting it down. Now I'm just going to laminate 2 pieces together, and I may have gone a little overboard with the glue there, but it's going to hold well. It kind of wiggled around a little bit too much for my liking for the small amount of clamps that I had, so I just decided just to screw a whole bunch of screws in there just to temporarily fix it in place, and I did take those out later. Now I'm securing it in place through those supports that I had, as well as the pocket holes on the side, and it's never going to move. And the nice thing is, since this is not glued to the actual cabinet, I can just unscrew it and replace it later if I ever need to get rid of this piece. And Bob Barker wanted to be right in the line of fire of my router. I had to try to get him to move, but he didn't want to go too far. And there we're just flushing up those edges. Just like on the other piece, I cut the top part a little long, knowing that I was going to use the flush trim bit. And next, to dress it up a little bit, we're using these pieces of poplar just as trim around the top to kind of hide that lamination and just make it look a little bit better. And then I do kind of like the light on dark look that it kind of gives. And so we're just putting a good amount of glue, and then I'm using the brad nailer here just to kind of secure it in place. And there was a bit of a bow in that piece, so just to be on the extra safe side, I'm going to end up using some clamps too to secure it. Now you want to make sure that the front part is as flush as possible. It's okay if the back hangs off a little bit. You can always fix that later, but you want the front part flush. That way this front piece kind of sits on it really nice. And these edges of the front, I'm also having go a little long, and we're going to use a flush trim bit later just to get everything nice and flush. And next is these extra pieces that I cut out for all 4 corners of my toe kick. That way I have a little bit more meat to grab for the levelers that I'm going to be putting in. So on the front part, I'm putting those flush with the bottom because that's where it's going to be the highest. I need the most movement on it. And on the back, I'm setting these down in there. That way the leveler kind of sits underneath, so I can almost get it straight down onto the wood back there. And then for these ones, I just added some extra screws just to make sure that it's going to never move. But realistically, it's going to sit underneath the cabinet and be supported underneath by the leveler, so it's never moving. Now that we got those in place, we can just go ahead and drill out holes for the pieces that are going to be inserted into there. And so I'm just kind of doing it right in the middle, and I use that little piece of tape to kind of mark my depth. And then when I put this in, I'm going to hammer it in place, but make sure that I'm not going straight into that little joint, because I don't want to use that part to split the joint that I just made with my glue. So I got those in, and then we can just kind of screw in our little leveler pieces, and then it's ready to go.
Okay, so I got this level, And I know it's a little hard to see on camera, but it kind of illustrates what I was talking about earlier, how unlevel my floor is. So I set these up, and I actually barely have this one just a little bit past it. This one is pretty much all the way down to the hub. So there's a slope down this way, and there's actually a hump in between as well. And then when you come down to this side, this one is fully extended. This one's probably about midway. So like each one of these has a different height on it. So it's very tricky to level on this floor here, which is why I decided to go with these detached bases. So now I can get this totally level. And when I am ready to install all of them, it'll be much easier just to go ahead and set it on here and attach it back here.
Next up is the drawer faces, and what I did here is I just kind of get everything nice and straight on one side, and then I just kind of marked out where I'm going to cut it all around to make sure it kind of fits it perfectly, and then I'm going to end up using the kerf of my saw as the spaces between each one of the drawer faces. And much to my delight, I got to do some more sanding. And not only did I do the drawer faces, I did sand the outside and back of the cabinet as well. Now here what I'm doing is I'm marking the very center of each of the drawers, because I made that little jig there, and I have the spacing on my different drawer faces, and that when I line up the two lines at the center, that gives me exactly where I need to make the holes for my cabinet pulls. So it makes it a little bit easier, so everything is going to be nice and uniform, dead center on all of the drawer faces. And I decided to do a little bit of a wipe-on poly finish on these. So I ended up putting 3 coats on these and the rest of the outside of the cabinet, with the light sanding in between. And I made the spacers you see there just on the same width as my the kerf of my saw blades, just to help with the spacing. So this initially was just a test fit to make sure everything is looking the way I wanted it to make sure I didn't have to make any other extra adjustments. And then once I get this all kind of to my satisfaction, then we can go through and put screws through where the drawer pulls are going to go, just to temporarily secure those into place. So now we got that first one there. I'm going to reposition all of my spacers and make sure that all the alignment is as good as I can get it. Now, of course, there's different ways to do this as well. You can have it stood up, and you can just clamp a piece of wood to the bottom and then do the bottom piece and then a spacer on top and then set each drawer on top and go from that. I just wanted to do it this way just because it seemed to work well for what I was doing. Now that we got all those pieces temporarily on, we can go ahead and fully secure them from the inside. So I just put a few screws in each one of them, then take out those temporary pieces and drill the rest of the hole all the way through. And then because my pieces are so thick, I had to use a Forstner bit just to kind of give a little extra spaces so the bolts for my hardware would actually fit through. So now that it does fit, we can go ahead and screw that into place, and the drawer is done. And of course, we're just going to repeat that process a few more times on all 8 of the drawers. And try not to notice all that mess on the left, but that's kind of what we're fixing with this build.
So now we got this cabinet made. The last step that I wanted to do for now is to put in these black mats that I got just from a box store. I got them, cut them up, and I'm going to put these inside just for a little extra neatness and protection on the inside of the drawers. So let's get those in. And I did do these for all the drawers. So that's it for today. However, I did want to mention that I did intentionally leave the surface unfinished. The reason being is because I still want to insert a T-track as well as a tape measure within the surface here. However, I don't quite know the placement of it yet. I'm waiting till I build the rest of the miter station, then I get the miter saw actually in place and make sure everything lines up the way I want it. So I hope you guys like the project. And if you do like what we're doing here, go ahead and subscribe or leave a comment down below. I'd love to hear from you guys. See you with the next one.